greatest of the gods, with those who bowed before him receiving good fortune, and those who dared to defy him subjected to terrible punishments. Having now taken control of the world, Zeus would look for a wife to rule by his side. But the king of the gods was famous for his infidelity, with him having no less than 7 wives during his reign. The first to marry Zeus would be the nymph Metis, the goddess of wisdom, with her soon falling pregnant with his child. But Zeus had been warned by his grandparents, Gaia and Uranus, that Metis was destined to bear him a treacherous son, who would one day take his throne. Seeing no other choice, Zeus would swallow Metis before she gave birth, in the hopes of avoiding the prophecy. But after he did so, Zeus would begin to suffer a terrible headache, with the pain becoming so intense that he would ask for his head to be split open with an axe. From the gap in his forehead would spring the child Metis had been carrying inside her, a daughter named Athena, the goddess of war and wisdom, fully grown and ready to take her place as one of the Olympians. Zeus's second wife would be his aunt Themis, the titan of justice and law, who had betrayed her own kind to side with the gods during their war with the Titans. The pair would only have 3 children together. However, they would come to garner great power over the mortal world. Known as the 3 Fates, these sisters become the goddesses of destiny, spinning a thread of life that would determine the road each individual soul would take. The youngest sister would be known as Clotho, the spinner, as she was responsible for spinning the thread of each human life as they were born, controlling if and when a soul was created. It was only through Clotho's great power that a new life would come to be. Her older sister, Lachesis, the Allotter, would determine the fate of each person. Using her rod, Lachesis would measure the length and nature of every thread spun upon Clotho's spindle, and in doing so, would plot out the duration, as well as every major event of each human life. And finally, the eldest and most feared sister would be known as Atropos, the Unturning. When a mortal's allotted time on Earth had come to an end, Atropos would take her great shears and end their life by cutting through the thread. Zeus would go on to have many more wives, fathering numerous gods and goddesses alike. But to his 7th and final wife, he would take his older sister Hera, the goddess of women and marriage, with Zeus having finally found a queen to rule by his side. But even after his marriage to Hera, Zeus's lustful eye would extend beyond the heavens, with the king of the gods continuing to pursue other women. Fathering countless children, Zeus would be related to nearly every god and hero, with him often disguising himself to gain the affection of women who drew his eye. One such woman, Europa, was the princess of the city Tyre, and sister to the famous hero Cadmus. One day, as she was picking flowers by the coast, Europa would draw the attention of Zeus, with the king of the gods deciding to claim her as his own. To hide his infidelity from Hera, Zeus decided to transform himself into a magnificent white bull before travelling down to Earth. Upon seeing the bull, Europa would be mesmerized by its beauty. Decided to climb her back. The moment she mounted him, however, Zeus would set out at full speed. Sprinting straight into the screaming in terror, Europa would grip desperately the bull's horns as it ran across the vast ocean. To reassure the terrified princess, Zeus would decide to reveal his true identity, telling her he was not merely a beast, but instead the king of the gods. The two would eventually arrive at Crete, the island on which Zeus was taken as a child, where she would bear him many children. Their offspring would eventually become some of them with mind of the legendary Minotaur being amongst them. To create fear, Zeus named and stood in and recreate the image of the white bull in the stars, but known as the constellation Taurus. Hera, wife of Zeus, protect married women, deep respected in Greek society. Although she was revered, she was also one of the most vengeful making a poor match for her husband, numerous assistants. Despite being Hera only bear him two of the Olympians, Ares and Hephaestus. The other gods come in for Zeus's nurses. One of his multi-ability was be most pieces in its eye from transformer into a cow. Queen was not faulted, and to she had used red-handed, would demand that he give her the white cow as a present. Knowing that refusing the request would only confirm Hera's suspicions, Zeus saw little choice but to accept, with Hera locking Io in a cave, where she would be guarded by the 100-eyed monster known as Argus. The perfect guardsman, Argus would sit with half his eyes asleep and the other half awake, never breaking his watch. Zeus was too terrified of Hera to intervene himself, to avenge the messenger god Hermes to free the miserable Io. A master musician, Hermes decided to defeat Argus not through strength but through wit. Approaching the monster as a friend, he began playing his pipes and sing sweet lullabies until Argus began to fall asleep. As the 100th eye finally shut, Hermes would take out his sword and slay the beast before releasing Io from her prison. To thank Argus for his service, Hera would take his eyes and set them in the tail of the peacock, her favourite bird, which would become a symbol of her power. Not yet finished with Io, she would send a gadfly to torment her as she made her escape, almost driving the woman insane. Io wandered long and far, with the sea which she ran along being named the Ionian Sea. The Bosphorus, which means ford of the cow, would also be named to commemorate the moment she passed by during her wanderings. Io would eventually arrive at the Nile in Egypt, far away from Hera, where Zeus would finally be able to restore her human form. The two would have a child, Epiphus, with Io becoming the ancestor to many of Greece's greatest heroes, including Perseus and Heracles. Leto, yet another of Zeus's lovers, and that of Apollo and Artemis, would experience the full extent of Hera's jealous rage. After finding out Leto had laid with Zeus and fallen pregnant with the twin, Hera would send the great serpent Python to torment her, forcing Leto to flee across in a desperate search to find refuge and a place to give birth to her children. Hera would forbid any city from providing with shelter, with Leto travelling from Athens to Crete, from Lemnos to Samos, with none willing to take her in, for the fear of upsetting the queen of the gods. Only the island of Delos was willing to offer Leto refuge, but she was still unable to deliver her children, as Hera, still scheming against her, had trapped Aethia, the goddess of childbirth, on Mount Olympus, preventing any from taking place. After 9 days and nights of agonizing labor, the other goddesses would take pity on Leto, retrieving Aethia from Olympus, and finally allowing her to give birth. Leto would name one child Apollo as the god of archery and the goddess of the hunt, who would grow up to become fully fledged gods of Olympus. Upon the birth of the twins, towns and cities across the known world would arrange great parties in their honor, with the city of Thebes hosting the greatest celebrations of all. Yet of all the city's inhabitants, only one would not take part in the festivities: Queen Niobe, whose beauty was matched only by her arrogance. Boasting to all who would listen, Niobe mocked Leto for having just 2 children, arguing that as she had many more, 7 sons and 7 daughters, she should receive the honours instead. Upon hearing the insult, Leto was furious that a mortal queen would dare disrespect her, and so sent Apollo and Artemis to the city of Thebes to enact her revenge. Raining down arrows from above, Apollo would kill each of her sons and Artemis every daughter, with Niobe left alone in despair. Distraught at the loss of her children, Niobe would flee to her homeland of Cetus, crying uncontrollably, begging the gods to put an end to her pain. Taking pity on the queen, Zeus would transform her into a great stone, forever ending her suffering. Located in western Turkey and known as the Weeping Rock, Niobe can still be seen grieving to this day, with tears flooding from her eyes whenever it rains, as the water flows through the porous rock. Apollo, the youngest twin, was the god of archery, light and music. He was also closely linked with prophecy, with him travelling to Mount Parnassus, where the great snake Python, which had chased his mother across the land, had made its home. Taking his revenge, he would slay the beast with countless shots from his golden bow, constructing a great temple where its body fell, a site that would become the home of the famous Oracle of Delphi. Known as the Pythia, the Oracle would become one of the most influential figures in ancient Greece, where anyone from great kings to common farmers went for advice. Said to be the mouthpiece of Apollo, she would inhale the vapours rising from her chamber and go into a frenzied state, delivering the god's prophecies through her psychotic and mental chanting. Following his great victory over Python, a beast he had killed with over 1,000 arrows, Apollo was filled with pride, declaring himself the greatest archer to have ever lived. So proud was Apollo that when he saw Eros, the youthful god of love, holding his bow and set of arrows, Apollo would laugh at the child, declaring that he was unfit to even wield such a weapon. Filled with rage, Eros would revenge against Apollo, promising to show him the full extent and true power of his bow. Following Apollo to the river Peneus, Eros would soon spot the river's daughter, the beautiful Daphne, sitting upon the shore. Taking aim with his bow, Eros would fire a gold-tipped arrow at Apollo, causing him to fall madly in love with her. Yet he would fire a second arrow at Daphne, one tipped with lead, that would make her feel nothing but disgust at the sight of Apollo. And so, the god of archery approached Daphne, overcome with desire. She would flee at the very sight of him, running through the forest in a desperate attempt to escape. Consumed by Eros' spell, and longing to confess his love, Apollo would chase her through the woods, using his divine powers to quickly catch up and reach her. Terrified of the god, Daphne would cry out to her father, the river god Peneus, for help. He would answer her call, with her soon beginning to feel a great heaviness overcome her limbs. Slowing to a halt, her skin would turn to bark, and her hair to leaves, until finally, Daphne's transformation was complete. Where a young and beautiful woman had once stood, was now the first laurel tree, with Apollo using his powers of eternal youth and immortality to make the laurel tree's leaves evergreen, ensuring they kept their colour all year round. Mourning his lost love, Apollo would carry a laurel wreath wherever he went, making sure that Daphne was always close to his heart. Apollo's most important child would be Asclepius, a famous physician who was so skilled that he was able to bring the dead back to life. But this would draw the wrath of Hades, as these resurrections destroyed the balance of nature and deprived the underworld of new souls. To restore the natural order, Zeus would kill Asclepius with a thunderbolt. Yet, at the pleading of Apollo, Zeus would later resurrect him, with Asclepius becoming the god of healing and medicine. Asclepius would later father Hygeia, the goddess of cleanliness, from whom we derive the word hygiene. Goddess of the hunt and twin sister of Apollo, Artemis was a deadly archer, watching over hunters and ensuring that nature was kept in check. A goddess of the moon and one of the three virgin goddesses alongside Athena and Hestia, Artemis was quick to anger, protecting her chastity by any means possible. When the hunter Actaeon, grandson of Cadmus, accidentally stumbled upon her as she lay bathing in the forest, the goddess was quick to punish him, Turning Actaeon into a deer, she would set his 50 hunting dogs upon him, with the hunter suffering a horrific and painful death for his mistake. Poseidon, brother of Zeus, rules the seas from his magnificent palace beneath the waves. Known as the Earthshaker, Poseidon would create all earthquakes, traveling across the oceans in his golden chariot, with him stirring and calming the waters with his famous trident. One of his harshest punishments would be inflicted upon Minos, king of Crete. After Minos refused to sacrifice his best bull to Poseidon, the god would curse Minos' wife to fall in love with the beast, which eventually led to the birth of the half-man, half-bull creature known as the Minotaur. But while he usually kept to his own domain in the seas, Poseidon would grow tired of Zeus's rule on Olympus. Alongside Athena, Hera, and Apollo, Poseidon would attempt to dethrone Zeus, but the rebellion would ultimately fail. Zeus would punish Poseidon and Apollo by sending them to serve King Laomedon of Troy, where they would spend an entire year building the city's giant and famous walls that would later have to withstand the force of Greece's mightiest armies during the Trojan War. Athena, the goddess of war and wisdom and the child of Zeus and Metis, was known for her love for strategists and cunning heroes, helping many of them on their great quests. But she was also a proud goddess, and to stake her claim on the world, she decided to compete for patronage of a great city in eastern Greece, which was yet to be named. Competing against her uncle Poseidon, the two would attempt to give the city the best gift. Poseidon would strike the ground with his trident, making a stream of water rise up for all to see. But as the water was salty, it could not be used to tend the land, with the city's inhabitants unimpressed. But Athena, wanting to give the city something they had never seen before, would place the pie hand on the earth, with the first Olivia moon, not only to the people of the land, but it would have many, with the introduced in and perfect and extreme benefits ancient. With Poseidon having his in shame, the gods would deem Athena victorious, with the city taking her name, becoming known as Athens, capital of Greece, and one of the most important cities of its era. The inventor of mathematics, Athena, also had a fondness for music, inventing the trumpet and the flute, as well as being patron of artists and craftsmen. She was particularly proud of her skill in weaving, although this would bring her into conflict with a young girl from Libya named Arachne. Highly skilled in craft, Arachne would boast she was the greatest weaver to ever live, challenging Athena to a competition. They would each produce a tapestry of the god, with the person that demonstrated the most skill being crowned victorious. The two would weave furiously for hours, until finally both pieces were complete. But to Athena's surprise, Arachne was far better than her own. Furious, she struck Arachne on the head again and again, until she lost her all. But rather than kill her, Athena transformed the girl into the first spider. She used her talent to weave beautiful webs, with the creatures known as taking her name. If you, unlike Arachne, want to avoid Athena's wrath, make sure you subscribe. And if you're feeling very generous, we've launched a new feature called Super Thanks, where you can help support the channel and get your message highlighted for us and others to see. Aphrodite, the goddess of love and beauty, was born from the genitals of Uranus, making her the oldest of the Olympians. A mischievous god, she would use her powers for her own amusement, making Zeus sleep with mortal women, so he would have to face the anger of Hera. Responsible for sexual attraction in both mortals and the gods alike, she would often be accompanied by Eros, known to the Romans as Cupid, whose arrows could charm any creature, with the two striking love into the hearts of unsuspecting mortals across the world. particular, Eros shot many arrows into the hearts of potential lovers who found themselves attracted to a beautiful young man who went by the name of Narcissus. While he was blessed with great beauty, he was also burdened by vanity and arrogance, taking pleasure in fully rejecting the advances of many women who pursued him. But soon he would cross paths with the nymph Echo, cursed by Hera after she became object of Zeus's affections. Echo was unable to use her voice except to copy others. Echo had been in love with Narcissus for some time, but when she finally found the courage to approach him, all she could do was repeat said. Unamused, Narcissus crueled her too, and in doing so would crush her spirit. In her grief, she would slowly waste away till her voice remained, a voice that can still be heard today as Echo repeats our words back to us. But Echo would not go unavenged, as Nemesis, the goddess of vengeance, had been watching. When Narcissus next bent down to drink from a lake, he would finally find the one he truly loved. Yet not a woman, but instead his own reflection. Mesmerized, he stared deeply into his own eyes, unable to turn away. For weeks he stayed by the pool, gazing at his own reflection, until finally he could endure it no more. Realizing never be anyone as beautiful as himself, he dagger and plain heart, from where the earth would come flower the first Narcissus, with the word narcissist stemming from history. But while some like Narcissus would become lost in the depth of love, others would seek endlessly to find it. One such man, Pygmalion, was a great artist from the island of Cyprus. After many years of unlucky love, he had given up on women entirely, resigning himself to a life of solitude, and instead focusing all his attention into his art. Beginning work on a new statue, Pygmalion would labour day after day, until the figure of a woman would begin to appear before him. Working harder than ever done before, Pygmalion would spend hours chiselling the most intricate details into his woman of stone, shaping her slender face, and carving out each lock of hair, until finally his masterpiece was complete. As he stepped back to admire his work, Pygmalion was struck by the beauty of his creation. Never before had he seen a more perfect statue, nor even a real woman who could match what he saw before him. Spending hours holding the statue's stone hand and kissing its cold, lifeless lips, Pygmalion would grow ever sadder and more lonely as he realized that he could never find a woman who loved more than the one he had cut from stone. Night after night in the workshop, Pygmalion would pray to the gods to bless the woman as perfect as his statue. But as he did, the stone figure behind him would begin to transform. Its cold and life hair would begin to turn into long and flowing locks, while its grey and bracken would become warm to the touch. Look in surprise, Pygmalion would be shocked to see a face smiling back at him, not one of stone, but with flesh and blood. Always happy to help those seeking love, Aphrodite had answered his prayers, with the once lifeless statue introducing herself as Taea, stepping down from her pedestal and embracing Pygmalion with open arms. His years of loneliness and isolation finally. But while Aphrodite took joy in her young couple's love, she was also a vain and jealous goddess who would take revenge against those who stole the spotlight away from her. Such was the case with the Greek princess Psyche, a mortal woman who was so beautiful that it was said she surpassed the goddess of love herself. With men from every corner of the earth coming to gaze at Psyche, they would soon forget about Aphrodite entirely, with all her altars becoming neglected and her temples falling to ruin. Furious that none were paying her attention, Aphrodite would call on her companion Eros, demanding that he use his powers to fight with vile and despicable man on the face of the earth. But when Eros was out her instructions, he too would be struck by Psyche's beauty, fall deeply in love for the first time, refusing to follow Aphrodite's commands. However, as Eros would now refuse to strike any man with love for Psyche, she would begin to grow sadder and more lonely as the years went on, before finally turning to the Oracle of Delphi for help. Following the Oracle's instructions, Psyche would travel to a magnificent palace, where it was said her husband would come to claim her. But upon arriving, the palace's servants would warn Psyche that her new husband was a secretive man, and would only visit her in the dark of night, with her never allowed to ask for his identity, nor seek to look upon his face. Overjoyed with her new life, Psyche would spend every day in the palace's beautiful gardens. But one day, Psyche would be overcome by her curiosity, taking an oil lamp and lighting it in the early hours of the morning. Looking down, she would be overcome with joy, as her husband was none other than Eros, the young and handsome god of love. However, in her excitement, Psyche would lose her grip on the lamp, with the hot oil falling down onto Eros's shoulder, causing the god to wake up in a fright. Disappointed that Psyche had failed to keep her trust in him, Eros would tell her that the marriage was over, before flying back to Mount Olympus. Distraught at the loss of her husband, Psyche would visit Aphrodite, begging the goddess for a chance to see Eros once again. But Aphrodite had not forgotten her hatred for the girl who had stolen the world's attention away from her. And so, when Psyche arrived to beg at the foot of her throne, Aphrodite would laugh in delight, setting the girl an impossible task. If she wanted to see her husband again, Psyche would have to travel to the underworld and ask Persephone, the queen of the dead, to place a fragment of her beauty within a golden box. Travelling to the underworld, Psyche would come to the river Styx, and after paying Charon's fee, would be ferried across its dark and haunting waters. Arriving in the throne room of Hades and Persephone, Psyche would approach the queen of the dead, who was happy to give her assistance, placing a fragment of her beauty within the golden box. But as Psyche began the trip back to Olympus, she'd be overwhelmed by curiosity once again, lifting up the lid of the golden box and taking a look at the fragment of Persephone's beauty contained within. But such things were not meant for mortal eyes, with Psyche falling to the ground and being enveloped by a dark and endless sleep. It was at this moment that Eros, moved by the length Psyche had gone to find him, would fly down to earth and use one of his arrows to save her from the grip of eternal sleep. Returning to Olympus, Zeus would arrange for them a great wedding celebration, where he would grant Psyche the gift of immortality. And so it was that Psyche, whose name means soul, would become a goddess. In her union with Eros, love and soul would now be forever linked, with their child Hedone, the goddess of pleasure, bringing joy to mortals across the earth. Deformity decided to throw him off Olympus into the sea to drown. Surviving the fall, Hephaestus would later return to the home of the gods and take his revenge, crafting a golden throne for Hera that would not allow her to stand back up once she sat upon it. It would only be through the intervention of Zeus that Hera would escape, with the king of the gods securing her release in exchange for gifting Hephaestus the goddess Aphrodite, the most beautiful Olympian, as his wife. Hephaestus would become a great inventor and fashioned many of the palaces on Olympus, as well as the equipment of the gods, with Athena's breastplate, Hermes' winged helmet and sandals, as well as Helios's chariot, all being crafted in his legendary forge. Some of his most famous work would be the bow and arrow of Eros, as well as the magnificent armour and shield of Achilles, with Hephaestus's creations aiding the greatest heroes of Greek mythology. To the Romans, he was known as Vulcan, the god of fire, who would forge his creations from a workshop beneath Sicily's Mount Etna, with it being said that the smoke and lava emitted by the volcano came from Vulcan's great forge beneath the surface. Ares, the god of war, delighted in battle and took pleasure in the slaughter of men and the sacking of towns. He was hated by mortals and gods alike, as he represented unrestrained rage, cruelty and bloodshed, with the gods playing tricks on him for their own amusement. Ares had a long-term affair with Aphrodite, the wife of Hephaestus, with the two sleeping together whenever her husband was away. When Hephaestus found out, he was furious and decided to forge an invisible net to hang over his bed. When Ares came to lie with Aphrodite again, the two would be trapped naked beneath the net, unable to move, with all the gods of Olympus called out to sea. Laughter would ring out throughout the heavens, with the humiliation only coming to an end when Poseidon took pity and decided to set them free. But Aphrodite was not the only lover of Ares, with him also having an affair with Eos, the goddess of the dawn, who would rise through the sky each morning to clear the path for her brother Helios, the sun, so that he could make his daily journey across the earth. When Aphrodite discovered the affair, she would jealously put a curse upon Eos, causing her to have an uncontrollable lust for the young mortal men of the world. And so one day, just as the morning hours were coming to an end, Eos would look down upon the earth, with her gaze settling upon the great city of Troy. For in the city was a young Trojan prince named Tithonus, so handsome that Eos was unable to look away. Descending to earth, Eos would introduce herself to the prince, with the two soon falling in love. At the end of each morning, when her duties were complete, Eos would travel down to Troy and meet with her beloved prince. But the more she grew to love him, the more she could not bear the thought of losing him to old age or to war, to starvation or disease, or to any of the other terrible ways mortal lives came to an abrupt end. And so, on her return to Mount Olympus, Eos would visit Zeus, begging him to make Tithonus immortal, a request he was happy to grant. But Eos had made one fatal mistake, as she had not asked for Tithonus to be given eternal youth. The two would live happily at first, but as the years went on and grey hairs began to appear on the prince's head, he would begin to realise the terrible fate that lay before him. By the time a century had passed, Tithonus would find himself crushed under the unbearable weight of age, his limbs no longer working and his mind having deteriorated. But as much as he wished for death, he knew it would never come. With sadness in her heart, Eos would take Tithonus's fragile body and lock it away in a grand chamber where he would be safe from the outside world. After years had passed and the prince had withered away until he was little more than bones, Eos would transform Tithonus into the first cicada, an insect known for its long lifespan, and for making noise during the early hours of the dawn, when Eos carries out her duties in the sky above. Hermes, the messenger god and patron of thieves, was known as a trickster amongst the gods, often teasing and annoying his fellow divinities. When he came of age, he assumed the role of messenger, travelling with a golden rod as a mark of his authority. Aided by his winged helmet and sandals, he would use them to fly around and deliver messages, frequently travelling between Olympus and the underworld. Here, he would help Hades, acting as a shepherd for the souls of the dead, guiding them as they made their way to the afterlife. Like the other gods, Hermes was known to father many children with various women, but one of his sons, Pan, the god of nature and fertility, would be born with the features of a satyr, creatures that were part man and part goat. But when he was born, Pan's mother, a nymph named Dryope, was so horrified to see her newborn baby with a pair of horns, a full-grown beard and hooves, that she would run away screaming in terror at the very sight of him. However, Hermes would take his child up to Mount Olympus and introduce him to the rest of the gods, who were so intrigued by the boy's hideous appearance and charmed by his playful attitude that they would soon come to adore him. None would love him more than Dionysus, the god of wine and parties, who would give him the name Pan, meaning all, as he was beloved by all the gods of Olympus. But much like his father, Pan was known for his many affairs with nymphs, the nature deities that inhabited streams and forests across the world. But one nymph by the name of Syrinx would become the object of Pan's affections, with him pursuing her through the marshes where she lived. Terrified of the god, Syrinx would try desperately to escape him, transforming herself into a bed of water reeds when she neared the river's edge. When Pan finally reached the river, he would tear through the marsh, trying to uncover the terrified nymph. But as he did so, a strong breeze would blow through the reeds, producing heard before. Inspired by the sound, Pan would uproot the reeds and bind them together with wax, creating a set of pipes. Sitting down, he would play a tune in the memory of his lost love Syrinx, with the instrument being named the Pan Pipes after its creator, and carried by the god wherever he went. The god of wine and parties, Dionysus would have an unusual birth when his mother Semele asked Zeus to appear before her in his true form, the sight of which would cause her to die of terror. Taking the infant that was growing inside her, Zeus would place it in his thigh until the baby was fully grown, with Dionysus being born a few months later. Becoming one of the most loved gods in Greece, Dionysus would be seen as a symbol of pleasure, with his followers engaging in mass drinking, crazed dancing and lovemaking. Known as the Liberator, Dionysus would create a new drink called wine, which helped his followers stem their pain, while also bringing them joy and euphoria. While he spent much of his time partying, Dionysus was also a generous god, willing to grant mortals their deepest desires. After saving a close friend of Dionysus, King Midas was granted a single wish in thanks. Obsessed with wealth and fortune, Midas asked for his deepest desire, the power to turn anything he touched into gold. Dionysus would grant Midas his wish, with him returning to his palace in joy, touching everything the eye could see. Soon the floors, walls, and even his clothes were gold, with Midas flaunting his wealth to guests from across the kingdom. After displaying his abilities for hours, Midas would become parched, ordering his servants to fetch him some water. However, as the liquid touched his lips, it too would turn to gold. Panicking, he would reach out across the table, but the bread, wine, meat and fruit would all turn into the precious metal. Nothing he touched could be consumed. Cursing the gift, Midas would begin to cry, with the sound of his sobbing alerting his daughter, who came to console him. But as she touched his hand, her fingers would begin to stiffen. Soon her whole arm was gold, and before long, all that remained was a statue of a little girl reaching out to comfort her father. Mourning the loss of his child, Midas would return to Dionysus, begging him to revoke his gift. Pitying the man, Dionysus instructed him to bathe in the river Pactolus, touch, being washed away, becoming normal once again. The story of King Midas serves as a warning who would prioritize wealth above all else. One of 12 Olympians and the sister of Zeus, Demeter, goddess of farming,